picture Versailles, not just a palace, but a shimmering mirage woven from gold, silk, and illusions. Here, beauty was the currency, and love was a weapon. Court ladies, like butterflies, fluttered in the glow of 1,000 candles, all striving for a single goal, the attention of the Sun King, Louis XIV. But behind this dazzling facade lay a dark room, invisible to all, a room of secrets, and in its most hidden drawer lay a book, not one of gold or studded with jewels, a modest, unremarkable volume bound in leather. Yet its contents were more dangerous than an entire enemy army. This was the Diary of Kisses. And today we will look inside. We will discover how the personal diary of a monarch, where he coldly judged his mistresses like horses at an auction, almost led to the downfall of the French monarchy. Versailles. It was more than just a palace. It was a giant, breathing mechanism. An intricate clockwork where the Sun King was not only the master clockmaker but also its main gear. Louis XIV didn't just build walls and fountains. He engineered life itself, subjecting it to a strict, unyielding ceremony. The lever, the coucher, meals, every action, even the most intimate, became a public performance, an act of asserting power. But there was one aspect of his life you'd think would remain outside this system. The realm of passion, of desire, of love. But no, the mind of Louis, his passion for order and control, knew no bounds. He could not allow even this to escape his all-seeing eye. And so, one evening, in the silence of his private study, by the light of a single candle that cast giant, dancing shadows on the walls, Louis picked up his pen. But not to sign an edict. He opened a blank page and wrote a neat, utterly emotionless title, The Register of Favors and Charms. Though among the courtiers, they devised a different, more succinct and cynical name for it, the Kiss Diary. Now picture this book. Picture its pages. These were not pages of passionate poetry or tender confessions. This was a dry report, a ledger of passion. Ruled columns like the accounting books of his stewards. The first column, name and title. Here all was proper and noble. Mademoiselle Louise de la Valliere, Madame Athénise de Montespan, Mademoiselle de Fontanges. The second column, period of favor, precise dates, start and end. Like the term of a contract, a 6-year romance was reduced to 2 numbers. The third column, the most shocking of all, assessment of qualities. He employed a 5-point scale. Physical charms. This rated the perfection of the body, grace, hair color, smoothness of the skin. Madame de Montespan, voluptuous and golden-haired, often received a 5+ here. Art of love. This evaluated passion, inventiveness, the skill of giving pleasure. It was a technical assessment. Wit and conversation. The king, a brilliant conversationalist himself, valued intellect. Louise de la Valliere, pious and quiet, sometimes received a 2 here, which the king noted with cold frankness. Inclined to melancholy and tears, becomes tiresome in prolonged company. Devotion and discretion. This was a key parameter, a rating for loyalty, for the ability to keep secrets. Not just his personal ones, but affairs of state. But the most dangerous, the most explosive column was at the very end. It held no numerical score, but was filled with neat, sparse notes. It was titled, Secrets, Confided in a Moment of Intimacy. Here, the king recorded whispered phrases, complaints about husbands, gossip about courtiers, details of family finances, doubts about the policies of his ministers. In moments of passion and trust, these women revealed their family's most intimate secrets and their own most vulnerable points. And Louis, like a machine, documented it all. He was collecting not just bodies, but information. This diary was more than a catalogue of mistresses. It was a map of every weakness, every fear, every piece of leverage over the French aristocracy. He transformed the dance of passion into a soulless minuet of accounting. Every kiss had its own rating, every caress its own cost. In this lay his genius and his monstrosity. He was not merely a lover. He was an architect of pleasure who believed that even the human heart could be categorized, numbered, and appraised. And he never suspected that this ledger of passion would one day present him with a bill he could not possibly pay. First, it was just a whisper, faint, like a breath of wind in the gardens of Versailles. No one could say where it began. Perhaps a valet let it slip, having glimpsed the book's binding on the king's table. Or a maid, tasked with dusting a secret drawer. Or maybe Louis himself, in a moment of pride for his system, uttered a phrase that was caught and carried away like a smoldering ember. But in the atmosphere of Versailles, where the air was thick with ambition and fear, that single ember was enough. The rumor of the Kiss Diary's existence began to creep through the marble galleries, seeping into boudoirs, card salons, and smoking rooms. It hovered over perfumed wigs and low-cut necklines like an invisible, poisonous scent. Imagine the panic that began to eat away at the court from the inside. Every woman who had ever been admitted to the king's private quarters asked herself the same question. Am I in it? And then, a more terrifying one. What did he write about me? It was a new, exquisitely refined form of terror. You could be the wealthiest duchess, have influence over ministers, and plot against your enemies. But all your power, your entire status, could crumble to dust in an instant because of a single line in that book. A score of 3 instead of a 5 in the Art of Love column was enough to make you the laughingstock of all Paris. A note about your tendency for dull conversation could forever block your children's path to the highest offices of state. And this fear gave birth to strange, sometimes absurd, and sometimes dangerous new forms of life. Vignette 1. The Alchemists and Perfumers. Fashionable perfumers on the Rue Saint-Honoré began receiving strange requests. Their clients weren't just asking for scents to make them appealing to the king. They demanded elixirs that could raise their score in the passion column. Alchemists, apothecaries, fortune-tellers, all of them were suddenly in high demand. Women secretly bought aphrodisiacs, potions to enhance the whiteness of the skin and the brilliance of the eyes, believing that magic could help them where nature may have been lacking. Vignette 2. Informants in petticoats. Love for the king had become a form of espionage. To increase their own value, women began gathering compromising information on others. Denunciations, overheard conversations, anonymous letters. All of it became a currency to be offered to Louis in exchange for a favorable entry in the diary. Your Majesty, I overheard the Marquise de N criticizing your new tax policy. Phrases like this became the password in this secret war. Vignette 3. Intrigue and defamation. If you couldn't improve your own score, you could ruin someone else's. Court intrigues reached a fever pitch. The most harmless rumors about a rival, accusations of infidelity, a hidden illness, a foolish remark, were swiftly reported to the king. The goal was simple, to make him reconsider an entry, assign a low score, cross a name off the list. This was not a battle for a heart, but for a line in a report. And then one day the system broke. They say it was Madame de Montespan, the dazzling, powerful Athenais whose name was featured in the diary with the highest scores. But one day, after a heated argument about a new favorite, she was consumed by a furious rage. Unable to contain herself, she screamed in his face the one thing everyone was too terrified to even think. You are not acting like a king, but like a shopkeeper, weighing his goods. You present us with bills for your affection, like a barber charging for a haircut. You judge us in your book, Your Majesty. You give us grades, but who will grade you? Who will judge you when you stand before God? History. Or perhaps this pathetic little diary you're so afraid of losing. In that moment, something shifted. Louis XIV, the God-given monarch, saw in her eyes not fear, not sycophancy, but judgment. He realized that his paper tiger, created to control others, had begun to control him. He had become a prisoner of his own system, a jailer in a gilded cage, and he himself had thrown away the key. The shadow cast by the diary grew longer than the shadow of his throne. The quiet panic at court was merely the precursor to the storm. The real danger came from the outside with the cold calculation of professionals. The secret network of Cardinal Mazarin, inherited by Louis, and his own, far more sophisticated intelligence service, began reporting alarming news. The information, trickling out from the boudoirs of Versailles, had reached the ears of those for whom it was not a subject of gossip, but a strategic asset. The hunt for the Kiss diary had begun. Agents of His Catholic Majesty, the King of Spain, and envoys from the United Provinces were ready to pay a king's ransom. English operatives in Paris reported to London. A document exists that could discredit the Bourbons in the eyes of all Europe and sow chaos in his government. Agent whispering, they say it contains everything. Names, dates, ratings. He grades them like livestock at a market. Spanish emissary coldly. We have no interest in his lewd fantasies. We are interested in the marginal notes. Secrets, confided in a moment of intimacy. Every word those women let slip about their husbands, fathers, brothers. The Marshal Vauban. Wasn't his wife once a favorite? And the Minister Colbert? Did their wives share family secrets with the king? Imagine if we could read that. Why was this document more dangerous than any military blueprint? It was a key not to fortress walls but to the human soul. Scenario 1. Discord and treason. All it would take was anonymously sending the page where the king rated the art of love of the Duchess de N to her elderly, notoriously jealous husband, a Marshal of France. The outcome was predictable. Scandal, a duel, the removal of one of France's best military commanders. Or they could blackmail the Duchess herself, forcing her to pry military secrets from her husband. Scenario 2. Political blackmail. The finance minister, Colbert, was pushing through unpopular reforms. What if his political rivals got hold of the entry about his wife, with the king's derogatory note about her common manners? It would instantly undermine Colbert's authority, making his family an object of ridicule and painting him as a man unable to manage his own household. Scenario 3. International scandal. The European courts were hungry for dirt on the Sun King. Publishing excerpts from the diary would have been a moral catastrophe. It would prove that the ruler of the most powerful Catholic nation was not a God-given monarch, but a cynical libertine behaving like a pimp in his own palace. It would strip France of all authority in the eyes of its allies and make it a laughingstock for its enemies. And then it happened. One morning, Louis XIV, wishing to consult his records, discovered that the secret drawer of his locked desk was empty. The Kiss diary was gone. Versailles froze. The panic that had been contained until now burst out into the open. This was more than a burglary. It was a violation of the monarch's most intimate secret. The disappearance lasted only 12 hours, but those hours were the longest of the Sun King's life. Legend says it was a young maid who smuggled the diary out, bribed by a Spanish agent. She was promised a sum large enough to support her and her family for 3 lifetimes. The diary was set to leave Paris amidst a diplomatic courier's baggage. Louis acted with lightning-fast brutality. Every gate in Versailles and Paris was sealed. Every courier, every carriage, every ship preparing to depart was subjected to a humiliating search. His agents stormed the Spanish ambassador's residence under the pretext of hunting an escaped criminal. A targeted, ruthless interrogation of the household staff began. During those hours, Louis XIV was no longer the all-powerful monarch. He was a man standing on the edge of an abyss. He understood, if the book was not found, his power, built on the image of an infallible, almost divine ruler, would crumble. The trust founded on fear would evaporate overnight. His enemies within the country would have the ultimate weapon to use against him. His enemies beyond its borders would have the moral justification for any war. This was not just a personal scandal. It was a threat to the very existence of the French monarchy. The diary was found. One version says the maid was caught as she tried to hand it to her contact. Another claims the Spaniards, realizing the commotion had grown too great, returned it themselves through an intermediary to avoid a declaration of war. But a price had been paid. Louis XIV got his paper tiger back. But he understood forever that he had not created a mere tool of control. He had created a monster that could, at any moment, break free and devour its creator. The shadow of that small leather book fell across the remainder of his reign, long, cold, and relentless. The Kiss Diary did not burn the palace down. It did not lead to an immediate revolt, but it became a symbol of how absolute power corrodes itself from within, how a ruler's cynicism sows the seeds of its own future collapse. The Sun King, who built the greatest palace in Europe, feared until his dying day the shadow cast by his own small leather-bound book. They say that on his deathbed he ordered it destroyed. But is that true? Or does it still lie in some secret archive, a silent reproach to the monarch who tried to grade love, and in doing so, devalued his own power? This was not just the story of a scandalous diary. It was a parable about how, when you start to judge people, you yourself become subject to judgment. The judgment of history,